Somehow, my daughters fell in love with Formula One. I don't know how or why, but I'm not arguing. They may not know wheel, but does anyone?
Should just be like, welcome to We Don't Know Wheel. I'm Grace,
I'm Anne
and this is Sister Talk about F1.
from two sisters who love Drive to Survive and are trying to figure out what Formula One is actually about.
I love it. But I do think someone was telling me like we should stay away from that like whole DDS vibe.
I know. But, well, to be fair, like
We're not just DDS fans.
We're not Drive to Survive fans. Like
I've
gotten to the point where I like actually following Formula One a lot more than I like Drive to Survive now.
Wow. She's bold.
I know.
I've gotten to the point where I've watched a lot of social media videos about Formula One teams. So
really?
I'm kind of an expert. Let's talk about this race. Okay.
Quickly, before we go any further, I do want to apologize to all the listeners for my voice. I got a cold from conferences and spent all day talking to 8th and 9th graders and lost it, so I apologize, but we'll power through. Sorry,
just embrace it as a Phoebe buffet.
I was thinking that when I was driving home today.
Yeah. I think it works.
Anyways, Austin.
So the Austin Grand Prix, the American Grand Prix, Cota.
Which, man,
what a race.
Were great race, great cowboy hats, and Daniel on a horse. What more could you ask for?
I mean, Carlos finishing a race would have been on maybe the top of my list.
Carlos. Wait, I saw this thing on Twitter today of the people who, or is a list of the number of laps completed by drivers.
I saw that.
And Carlos was at the bottom.
He was at the bottom, and he's still like in 6th in the driver's standings.
I know. With 6 DNFs.
Yes, and I think I read something that, did he finish every race last season? That's the wildest thing to me, because it's one thing to be a driver who DNFs a lot. It's another to be like, you're in your 8th year of Formula One. You've consistently been a very consistent driver, and then start DNFing. I was actually talking to Mom about that this afternoon. And
which I feel like, from my memory, there have not been a lot of like crashes that were Carlos's fault. It's been like engine failures or someone crashing into Carlos.
Yes, it's very unlucky.
He's not Max Verstappen in like 2017 doing crazy things and making people really mad at him. But you were talking to Mom earlier?
Yeah, I was talking to Mom about it earlier. And I think I've seen like some rumblings on Tumblr about like, there's definitely a vibe, I think, in the commentary on the races that like Carlos is doing this in some way. And I think the Tumblr community that I see is like, that is so rude. Because, Russell got penalized because Carlos was in the driver's line. But I think I was switching between all the different commentary tracks when I watched this race. I was
going to ask you what commentary you were watching, because I watched the whole race with the F1 TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious what you had watched and what your experience had been.
I watched F1 TV for I think almost the whole race. I watched the F1 TV commentary, but then probably the first, like, after like 10 minutes in, I'd switched it. When I rewatched, I switched it and watched the like international. And I was surprised how different it was, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
And I don't want to I'm like, I don't have the time to be watching multiple takes of the entire race. And like the people who are watching everyone's onboards, I'm like, how?
I know.
No, we don't have time for that.
Definitely not.
But I did watch Carlos's onboard until he crashed as well. Just because I wanted to know, like I wanted to see it. And I don't know, like I think Mom was basically saying like that he, like, yes, he wasn't in the wrong, but he did get himself into a situation where he was at risk of getting crashed into. And I think maybe Crofty said something similar. Like basically she was saying like your only job in the first lap is just don't crash.
Yeah.
And
what did Carlos do to make George Russell crash into him?
I mean, like he was like, you know, aggressively trying to fight with Max, which is his job. That's what they're supposed to do. But I do think there's a little space to be like, he wasn't able to finish the race because he was trying so hard to get back into first. And that's a rough one. I do think my impression of Carlos is that I think from like reading some interviews he's done and stuff that like, and some podcasts he's done, he's talked about how he wasn't like a super aggressive karter as a kid, and I think like that seems like his, you know, his vibe is pretty mellow. And he talks about like the best advice his dad ever gave him is to bite or you'll get bitten. And so I think, did we talk about this in the last episode? Like, I think that's why he's one of my favorite drivers, because he's so like, doesn't feel like he has that same, like Max Verstappen is like, I'm not trying to make myself like this. I am this. Whereas Carlos Sainz has the vibe way more of like, I need to be aggressive if I want to win this. And I do want to win. And I wonder a lot about if a lot of this season has been him trying to find that balance of like, he's very consistent. He's definitely this like very stable driver, but now he's like, but if I want to win, I need one more thing. And maybe that's that aggression. And that is definitely a balancing act. Cause like you were saying, like with Max in his first few years, he was so aggressive. He was crashing into people all the time. So like, yeah, you're not going to win a championship like that, but you have to learn how to thread the needle.
Yeah, which I feel like just as much as Charles and Max are an interesting comparison because they're so different, but they're put in similar positions. I think Checo and Carlos are an interesting comparison because they're both put in the like stability number 2 driver role. And I feel like they've both struggled in different ways with it, where like Checo has legitimately struggled coming to terms with the car in some ways. And I feel like Carlos, his struggle has been, trying to find that balance of like aggression or non-aggression, because like there have been a lot of ways throughout the season in which he's been the better, stable number 2 quote unquote driver compared to Checo. But because of these DNFs, some of which were completely out of his hands, he's not performing. He has not ended up performing as well as Checo has in terms of points.
Yeah. And it's, I think I was like saying to Mom, like, it's one thing when you just are that driver who's inconsistent. It's really interesting in the case of Carlos, where it's like, he's typically so consistent through the season. And when he stays in the race, he's doing incredible. Yeah. But yeah, rough one to...
When he stays in the race and when he's not screwed over on strategy by Ferrari.
Well, you know.
Ferrari will Ferrari.
Well, and I think also, like Carlos does, to me, seem to have a little better handle. It makes sense because he's older on just being like, I'm not going to get wrapped up in bad Ferrari strategy. The way that Charles has kind of gone down with that ship a little bit occasionally. So I watched his onboard, and that was that was interesting because I just wanted to see the crash and I knew it was so fast into it. So that I was like, oof. And yeah, and then I watched a little bit of the international version, but I actually ended up not loving it. I thought they were, for my taste, it was just, I think I texted you, but I was like, it's way too definitive. And like, why are you being definitive? It's a race. Like, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, you said, you call them arrogant.
Yeah, and obviously they know a lot, but like nobody knows the end, especially when the FIA is involved.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Did you hear about all the drama with Fernando today?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Oh, man, first of all, I don't know how he managed to claw his way back to 7th place after his car was literally flying.
Okay, that's very quickly. I know this is all over social media, but truly, how is the Alpine in the air hitting the side of the barrier? And Alonso's just like, I'm fine. I'm finishing this race. And the Ferrari got like gently knocked and they were like, retire the car. I'm just like, what is happening with the Ferrari?
Okay, to be fair to Ferrari, I did hear commentary from someone saying that like some important internal system for the functioning of the car.
Yeah, it was like ruined. The radiator, but still, like that has happened a bunch where they're like, oh, you spun off, retire the car. Oh,
I mean, Carlos's car literally went up in flames earlier this year.
I'm not saying I'm saying Ferrari needs to design a sturdier car. Just kidding. But like, also, speaking of Alonso, it's making me remember I watched, like, he had an Amazon show that was like,
I know, I keep meaning to watch it, but I feel like you've also said it's interesting, but kind of downplayed it.
Yeah. And it was back when Stoffel Van Horn was at
Van Dorn.
And Van Dorn. Van Dorn?
I think so. I think it was Van Dorn.
I think you're right.
I can double
check. But it's when they were teammates at McLaren. And I watched that show and I was like, oh, Fernando Alonso is the worst. And I'm watching him just run this team and this car into the ground. I don't know if that's true, but that was the impression he gave me. I did not like him. And yeah, does he have big time like anti-hero energy? He does. But to watch someone crash and then just be like, send me back out, coach. I love it. He makes you love him. Like, you're like, I want to hate you, but I really like you.
I know. Yeah, so it is Stoffel Van Dorn. And I completely agree. We're like, in the first season of Drive to Survive, the way they paint it is there's this weird juxtaposition where they almost make it seem like it is Alonso's fault that the team is just sinking and can't fix anything. But then at the same time, they show him, is it in Baku, where like 3 of his tires are literally falling off and he gets his car back to the pits and he continues the race, which I feel like
incredible.
It's incredible. And this is a way better example than that.
Well, also, I have to say, like, to be very truthful, and maybe I'm completely wrong here, but my impression, especially with Formula One as it currently stands, is that like youth is in your favor. And the older you get, the less good you get at driving because you're losing your reflexes, you're losing your strength. And in the past, I think that like the physical side and the reflexes were slightly less important. And you could get away with being a really successful older driver. But now it's like Carlos is aging out and he's 28.
I know. Checo's only like 32 and he's definitely like, people are not sure if he's ever going to get another contract extension because he's going to be too old soon.
Yes. And so, and you know, you watch Vettel and Hamilton and you're kind of like, obviously there's a point of like, you know, you're too old, but like to watch Fernando be so competitive and be the oldest guy on the grid, I Obsessed. I love it.
It's amazing. It's like slightly hard to understand how he's able to do it.
That's what I want to know, because I'm like, I
Yeah.
actually have this impression, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but I'm like, if he was in a better car, would he be up here winning? Because it feels like it.
Yeah. But I also don't think any of the top teams want to take on the drama of Fernando Alonso.
I completely agree. Like, I'm like, he's troublesome. Do not touch him, because he will destroy your team.
Yes. And if you have some other superstar in your team, he will destroy your superstar.
Yeah, like don't do it.
Yeah.
McLaren was right to get rid of him. There was no saving that ship. But yeah, he's an enjoyable driver to watch. Like,
it's the burner of bridges and the destroyer of teammates.
yeah. I mean, he's killing it. I loved that. I watched the race in like chunks, because I was like, watched a little bit of the beginning, and then I went to a friend's house, and then they actually had the race on. But that part was the only part of the race that I had missed. And so that was the part that I went back and was like, I have to watch this because I need to know what happened.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I forgot what I was going to say.
I love that he took out Stroll. That was incredible. And I love that Stroll was like, I crashed. Like, he knew he messed up.
Yeah.
That was also definitely like a learning experience for me, where I was like, I didn't realize that, like, if you see someone in the mirror making a move, you have to like let them make the move.
I did not know that either. Yeah, super.
I was like, oh. And that's like apparently Stroll's MO. Which I'm like, that's what I would do. I have horrible reflexes. I would be like, oh, and you'd be like, oh no, I crashed.
I was listening to some commentary after the race with James Hinchcliffe, who used to be an IndyCar driver. And one of the things he was talking about, yeah, he's good. He also seemed like very knowledgeable and passionate about Formula One, which was fun from somebody who's like very much an Indy guy. But he was saying that in IndyCar there are rules that, like, what was he saying? There are essentially rules that, like, you can't make deep reactive defensive maneuvers. You can only make proactive defensive maneuvers.
Which I'm like, someone explain to me the minutia of this.
It's very interesting.
It's on the subtle level. And it's the same thing with like Carlos being on the racing line. And so like ultimately Carlos is fine, even though he's like cutting in front of George a little bit, but it's like George should know he's on his racing line, like he's gonna turn there.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that I want to know more and more about. And to take this a tiny bit off track, I've been thinking a lot recently about the whole debacle of what are those guys who have the podcast?
Oh, Pit Stop Podcast.
And like,
you really
everything with here? Like, yeah, why not? Everything with like gatekeeping the sport, but also like, and I was trying to explain to a friend last night, like why I do kind of think there's something to be said about the issue with Pit Stop Podcast. So let's get into it. No, no, I was just saying like I had this experience this weekend where I was at this party and I'm watching the race with friends and like people I sort of know, and someone was at the party, watched when Vettel did his second pit, and he was like, oh my god, why is he pitting? And I was like, he's only pitted once, everyone else has pitted twice. And he was like, no, he's already pitted twice. And I was like, that's Sebastian Vettel, he's only pitted once. And he was like, that's Hamilton. He's been
leading the race.
Yes. And he was like, no, that's Hamilton, why is he pitting? And I'm like, there's a number 5 on the man's car. And
not he 44
would not believe me. And then another man who was near me like turned around and was like, that's Sebastian Vettel. And he was like, oh my god. And I was like, I've never had this experience because I've never been into like sports. I'm like very sports. That's so bad. But I've never been into like very masculine pursuits, to be honest. Like, and I don't want to use the word masculine. I want to say like activities that are typically males are involved with or something. I don't know the right way to frame that. But I'm you know, I'm a midwife. I spend all my time with mostly people who have vaginas. And that's my life. And I like those activities and I like that stuff. You know, I'm always trying to like figure out ways to meet men. And I'm horrible at it. I'm like taking pottery classes and it's like all women. And it's like, yeah, of course it's gonna be all women. But so I had never had that experience of like having a man completely discount me. I think almost exclusively because I was a woman. Like, and I was just like, I don't think I know a lot about this, but I do know Sebastian Vettel's number because I have been a teenage girl and I know how to hyperfixate, and I am hyperfixating on this sport right now. So of course I know Sebastian Vettel's freaking number, dude.
Yeah. It's interesting to compare experiences because I have, after my first year of teaching, I have worked in all departments that have had like a majority of men, which like social studies is kind of typically has more male teachers when you, especially when you get to the high school level. And so like, as much as I do typically surround myself with female friends, I think because of that and because of my experience being a football fan, I have spent more time in, like, yeah, it's hard to find the right words to
like
describe
male-dominated spaces, maybe male-dominated spaces,
male-dominated fandoms.
Yeah,
the right word.
Yeah, it's like when I'm with the Harry Styles girlies, I'm good. We're all hyperfixating and we all believe each other. No.
Yeah. And like I feel comfortable when my freshman boys are talking about their fantasy football teams today during our break during class. Like I can jump in that conversation. But I have not had an experience like that where like I've known something to be true. I can show you the proof that it's true and a guy would not believe me. That's just like bonkers to me.
It felt bonkers. Like I was like, what is happening right now?
How
what is going on?
Internalized misogynism do you have to do that?
I don't know. It was a wild ride. But it made me think a lot about like, you and I are doing this because we enjoy this and it's fun for us. And that's what I want this to be. But
Absolutely.
It's also like, then you start to wonder like, well, am I like making content that I know nothing about? And I was like, no, because the difference is when I'm not sure of something, I'm going to go look it up because I want to know, because I'm hyperfixating. So of course I'm like, I'm not going to say something I don't know, but there are things about F1 that I'm like, I really don't understand. And a lot of it is these like driving rules about like the driving line and like, you can't defensively defend or whatever. And I'm like, someone give me a class. Someone teach a class because I want to take it.
I agree. Where like when you're looking at whether or not someone has like gone off track limits, not too difficult to understand.
Yeah.
But the rules about like who's at fault for an accident or when someone's like done a defensive or offensive move that they're not allowed to, totally over my head.
Yes. Also, let's back to the race. Obsessed with Hamilton. Like he's over track limits as he's desperately trying not to go over track limits. Like
so good.
And took me like straight back to my favorite thing, driver's debrief. And like,
this is gonna be a good one this week.
Yeah, I was like, I literally turned to Jamie and I was like, all I want is to watch the driver's debrief this week. Like I'm desperate for it. Because yeah. And there's something so interesting about like, I mean, they're tattletales and they're all doing it. Every single one of them is like, he did this to me. And they're tattletales because there's a benefit, which I mean, it's the same with like soccer or whatever, where it's like, you go down hard because you want the advantage, but like there's something very funny about that whole side of like, he touched me, and you're like, okay, buddy.
Yeah, it was hilarious. I especially like seeing Hamilton complain over the radio multiple times about like, he just went up in this corner, he just went up in this corner. That was amazing in itself. And then when Hamilton got the what's the
white and black flag?
Is it the white and black flag
for himself?
So. That just pushed it over the top. It's so good. And there's so many good memes about it.
So good. Delightful. And then I feel like, I mean, so much I loved watching Vettel lead the race for a little bit. I think everyone in our family, well, maybe not Anne, but everyone else was just like cheering Vettel on. Like there was no tomorrow.
I mean, I was really happy for him. I also knew that it was only going to last so long.
I know, but like really delightful.
I love Seb. I was so happy for him.
And then that pit stop though, oh my gosh, like he was doing so well, and that pit stop was like, this is a disaster. Well, yeah, as that guy was being like, Hamilton's pitting, I was like, are you watching that this is like an 11-second pit stop? Like, you want to comment?
I mean, Mercedes has done it in the past.
I know. Well, I wasn't even saying that. I was just like, there's enough time to figure out who this is. His name is on the screen. No.
Yes. Also, green, silver.
I know.
Same color.
And then he was like, their livery looks the same. And I was like, no, it does not.
No, it does not. Oh my gosh.
I was enjoying that. Yeah. So that was wild. And then, Daniel Ricciardo. Let's just bring it back to the Danny of it all. That was
don't understand
heartbreaking
at all what happened to him.
Yeah. I can't remember what I was thinking about with this, but I think you will know, Anne. Like Anne and I are texting during the race across the country. And
to be fair, Sarah joined in this time. It was quite enthusiastic. It was amazing.
Sister Sarah was there. And we're all like, what's going on with Danny? Poor Daniel Ricciardo. This is a mess. And Anne just texts, McLaren left him on red. And that was not dead. Me. I thought that was you.
It was not me. I wish it was.
I think it was. I swear, Anne, you texted
or was it
that.
Jamie?
It was you, because Jamie and I laughed at it.
Or was it a meme that I sent?
No, you just wrote McLaren left him on red, and I was like, Anne, it's hilarious.
I swear that was Sarah.
You wrote that, I think. I love that you won't take credit for this. You're like, I didn't say that.
Not that funny.
Either way, someone said it. It is hilarious. McLaren did leave him on red. And
Sarah.
Okay. Sarah's funny. Sarah's funny then. Sarah says McLaren left him on red, and I died, because that is true and harsh.
I was dying.
Not harsh. That's just completely fair. And I do feel like he had bad race strategy calls from McLaren.
I don't understand how he was down, like, fighting with Latifi while Lando ended up getting, like, 7th. How? He's not that much slower.
Yeah.
I don't get it at all.
Yeah. I mean, he's struggling with that car a lot, but there's also a side where you're like, McLaren is not helping him.
Yeah. I honestly, like, I don't even know fully how it happened, because they weren't really showing that during race coverage. It was just all, I kept noticing every once in a while, like, wait, Daniel's like down behind Latifi right now. He's just gotten past Latifi. Like, what's happening? Yeah,
it was rough to watch.
Very rough. And he was so dejected after the race. It was like one of the hardest post-race interviews of him to watch, because you could just tell how sad he was.
Yeah, it was the first time that I felt like maybe he does need a year away. Maybe he needs to do something else for a while, because this is, and And I don't know, like it would be, I wish I could see all of the all of the universes that are possible, because I'm like, maybe it truly is just like if he was at a different team and had different support, he would be doing differently. But
Yeah.
when you watch this year, you're just like, maybe you need a change of scenery, bud. Like, love you,
Well,
but
okay,
this isn't
related
working.
to this, I have
Yeah.
something I ran across this week that I've saved
Okay.
to send you as one of my favorite things from the week, which this
Okay.
I saw when, so there have been all sorts of rumors about Daniel having signed a reserve seat, and then they were saying it wasn't Mercedes, and so then people, of course, got on the Daniel going to reserve at Redbull hype train and saw this. You can check your texts.
Okay. I'm going to the text. Let's see what Anne has sent. Reaction pics. I heard that. I've seen some stuff saying that he's going to Redbull. Okay, I'm going to watch this video that you've sent me.
I think it's just a GIF, if I remember right.
No, it's a video.
Is that a whole video?
Yes. Okay. That's very cute. It would be interesting.
So the tweet just says
Well,
Daniel Ricciardo walking back into Red Bull
yeah.
Racing Garage next year with a fun video of a guy dancing walking to this meeting. Very, very cute. I think it would be in some ways really fun to see Daniel as a reserve at Red Bull, just because him and Max are such good buddies and they'd be hilarious together. At the same time, not getting to see him actually race would be very sad.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, I think that was kind of why I was like, maybe he goes to AlphaTauri.
But they've both been confirmed, so I don't think that's even a possibility.
Yeah.
And to be fair, since all of those rumors, Daniel himself has said that no deal has been signed with anyone. So who knows?
Yeah, I know. It'll be interesting to see what he ends up doing next year.
Yeah.
But it is hard to watch. And then it makes me feel bad. Like I'm a fair weather fan to Daniel because I love him. What a delight. Nobody dislikes Daniel.
It's very hard to dislike him.
It's very hard to watch that. Like, it's very difficult to watch how hard this year has been. Like, you want to look away.
Yeah.
I think, and I want to say, to cut myself some slack, I want to say I want to look away because it feels like I'm looking in on like a very intimate, difficult moment. And I feel like it's very voyeuristic. And I'm like, I got to get out of here. And I think about that when like Carlos DNFs and, you know, when they're walking around in their helmets, or like Lance is walking back after his crash with Fernando with his little helmet on. And you're just like, yeah, keep that helmet on because I don't want to watch you cry either. Not because I don't care about you.
Yeah. Or like
because
when Charles screamed in the car when he crashed out from the lead of a race earlier this year.
Yeah.
Those moments are hard to watch.
Yeah. And like, I think a lot of the Carlos girlies out there on Tumblr were like, his silence is like deafening in that onboard because he's just like, it's rough. It's so sad. I can't get in there. And it is so wild to me how many fan fictions are out there of like comforting someone after they crash. And I'm like, I need to be in therapy because I don't want to do that. And then I'm like, what's wrong with me? I'm only here for the good times. But I'm like, that sounds horrible. Why is that your fantasy fiction you're writing?
Yeah.
People love some angst though.
Yeah. I also feel like with Daniel, as much fun as it has been to see him like happy and giddy around the paddock, and especially on like Thursdays and Fridays, the last two races, in some ways you can almost tell that he's like using it to like cover up pain and just like try his best to enjoy the little time he has left as a full-fledged driver, and that
Yeah.
then makes it painful as much as you're still
Sarah,
enjoying it.
Sarah and I have talked about that because like I'm trying to like just do some general reading of the fan fiction on the internet to bring here because everyone's telling me they like that, even though I feel like deeply embarrassed about it. Like I'm like, I don't want people to know that I'm out here reading fan fiction. But I was like, I was doing my research on the Daniel fanfic, and like it's so funny because he's obviously like known as the most jovial driver on the grid, but his fics all have this undercurrent of sadness that you're like, ooh, oh man,
Oh,
that is
Daniel.
real. Not, I don't know that it's real. I don't know him in real life, but
Yeah.
that is the feeling that I think all of us are having of like, he's really fun, but there's something really rough under the surface.
Yeah. I think that's real to some degree. I mean,
Anne's like, let me engage in the parasocial relationships. He is sad. He's sad, he told me.
I mean, how can someone in his position not be sad?
Yeah. It's
Watching your teammate be 7th in the drivers' championship and like best of the rest outside of the top 3 teams, and then you're racing Latifi.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's interesting because I think even Lando acknowledges like the car is bad. But I saw an interview with Daniel recently where he was like, I think that Lando's benefit is that he's never driven another car, so he doesn't know that it can be different. And I hear what Daniel's saying there. Like, I can understand that perspective, but it's also like, I think part of that issue is almost like it's psychological, right? Because it's Daniel's perception that like if he didn't know that it could be better, he could get his head around this car. But instead, it's almost like he's so wrapped up in like this car is undrivable that it's making it like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Which I also feel like at some point you got to either figure out, how do I learn to drive this car, or how do I get the team to change the car so it is more drivable for me?
Yeah.
And not for any lack of trying, he just hasn't been able to do either of those things.
Yeah.
On a consistent basis, at least. Where like he'll have some good races and then just race Latifi.
Yeah. And then to me, the psychological aspect of Formula One is so wild. And the idea that these guys are not just like constantly seeing therapists. And I know they all have like their guys and they do their stuff, but I'm like, I can't believe they don't do more because I don't know. I think I've read a couple things with drivers where they'll ask about like, what are your superstitions? And I read something from someone where they were basically like, you lose your superstitions really fast because, and maybe it was even from Daniel, because you can't live like that. And I can see that because I remember when I started working as a midwife and like, I had my own superstitions. Like I was like, I won't bring a book to work because if you bring a book to work, you're never gonna get sit down. Yes. And so, and honestly, I still never bring a book to work because I'm like, it's bad luck. But I don't really believe it anymore. I think I'm just like too busy. Yeah. But I can see how there's a point where like you race enough and you're just like, all I can do is bring what I have to the track. But then I think you get to the other side of it's not superstition anymore, but to the realization of like, all I can bring is what I have to the track and all I have is my mind and my body. But you know what I mean? Like your mind is such a huge part of that and your ability to recover. And I do have this like little feeling in the back of my brain that like when I don't know, I felt like watching the Carlos Max start, I was like, I almost felt like I could feel Carlos like get flustered in that car.
Yeah, and well, even before the race, even like in interviews right after qualifying, Carlos was admitting like Red Bull has had the faster over the race distance car all year, and it's going to be really, really tough for me to not lose to Max. And I think if you go in with that type of mindset, it's like, I mean, I don't know the psychology behind driving, but it seems like that's not going to help you.
Yes. And it's interesting because I felt like it was really interesting to see him in qualifying because it felt like he was just like, I woke up this morning, I felt freaking good. Let's go out there and be the fastest car on the track. And
He
seemed
seemed
so
to have
like,
felt good all weekend until
yes.
he
And
finished
then he
qualifying,
came
had
in.
gotten pole, and
Yeah. Like Sunday, it was like you could see him be like, I gotta win this freaking race. And yeah, you wonder about the psychology of that. And like, I don't know. All I can think about is my own experience in therapy with anxiety with my own job and how much time I've spent on like, I think actually the most helpful thing my therapist has talked to me about is like, what's the worst thing that could happen? You're awake all night long. You'll survive. And somehow that's actually been like the most freeing. Like I have midwife friends who like they bring essential oils and their best pillows and blankets so they can sleep through the night. And I'm just like, what's the worst that can happen? I'm awake all night long. And I'm always fine on the other side. And it feels like that with racing too, where you're like, you can do all the things where you're like, okay, today I have the best race. Or you can be like, I'm here to have a good time. And it does feel like Daniel's doing that. It's not working for him either. So what do I know?
Yeah. I mean, like, if you look at back when Checo got his first win, when he got crashed into by Charles on the first lap, and then at that point he started driving where it's like he had nothing to lose. He could only move up from where he was, and he just killed it the rest of the race.
And I do love watching drivers like do that. Like I love watching someone, I mean, obviously it's like the human spirit, but it's also like, yeah, that's why Fernando's enjoyable. Like,
yes,
he just gets right back out there. And I think that's also what's been so hard to watch with Carlos's all of his DNFs, because you're like, he can't even get back out there to redeem himself. And it's interesting hearing him in interviews be like, I can't even learn from the car because I can't get back on the track.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're like, oof, yeah, that's the real one.
Real rough.
Yeah. So if we ever get so famous that we get to interview people, let's get the driver's psychologist on the phone. And we're like, no HIPAA violations here. We just want to know, like, what are the strategies? And is that all secret? Are they like, that's not for sale because I don't want the other drivers to know the strategy I teach them? You know that Lewis Hamilton must have someone like that because he seems so zen. Yes. He is out here like the focused queen that he is.
I would be curious to know, like, it feels like Max is the type of person who's just like,
he doesn't even need therapy.
I don't need it. I'm just gonna do what I do. But like, how can anybody withstand the type of pressure that he did last year without having someone to talk to?
Well, I'm gonna say something controversial here. So everyone feel free to take me to task. And I know nothing, and this is all speculation.
We don't know wheel.
We don't know wheel. But I mean, my assumption here is a childhood of intense pressure from Jos Verstappen is how you survive that. Because if that's what you know, like people like that, they don't crack under that pressure because that's been their whole lives. All they have is coping mechanisms for that. And when that pressure's gone, that's actually when they have trouble. So I'm sure that for him, Red Bull is like great because that's the lived experience. That's my perception. I have no idea if that's true.
Like the kid whose parents check every single thing they do for school every single day until they leave for college, and then they legally can't, and then they completely fall apart at college.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had not thought about it that way.
But I do think like it does seem like Max has spent much of his childhood in a little bit of a pressure cooker.
You don't say.
They all have, but there's definitely varying amounts of that. And like, I don't think we actually really know that much about Daniel Ricciardo in his childhood, but it definitely seems like he was just passionate about something and his parents were like letting him do what he wanted to do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only basing it off of like the first episode of Drive to Survive where they like highlight his parents, but they seem very normal and have the like most normal reaction to any parents watching their kid drive an F1, which is they're just sitting there nervous all the time. I don't want my kid to get hurt or die. Not a ton of F1 parents are that normal.
Yeah. And I always thought like that the issue with Daniel was that Redbull was such a pressure cooker. And that's why he wanted out, was just that's not his vibe. But
and it wasn't that he was performing poorly at Redbull, is that he felt like he wasn't happy.
I think that's the narrative that Drive to Survive is selling us, but it also feels kind of true. Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell.
Well, he also must have had some reason for wanting to leave them, and like he knew what the Renault engine was when he left Red Bull. Yeah. That's all he had been driving on. And like the second half of his 2018 season, his engine was blowing up left and right.
Yeah. And it's definitely like, I think we've talked about the Pierre and Este of it all, but like Otmar just straight up is like, I hope they scrap it out. And you're like, oof, oof. You know, and that was definitely not Cyril's vibe. Like, Cyril's like, I hope we're all best friends.
Come in and have the best food in the paddock.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like it's, yeah. And there's that whole interview with Cyril and Horner where Cyril's basically just like, he wants somewhere nice to go. This is just like an in passing. It's not like a detailed interview, but it's Cyril like coming for Horner. And he's just like, he liked me better. So I don't know.
Speaking of Esteban, I feel like the perfect example of why people seemingly don't like him that much is he has this year in interviews said things to the effect of like, Fernando is the most amazing driver in Formula One right now, and I'm beating him. I'm the best teammate Fernando Alonso has ever had. Not to that he hasn't said it to that extreme, but that's the like effect of what he's trying to say.
Yeah, he's
ridiculous.
He's not won me over.
No.
Is he winning anyone over?
I don't know. I can't speak for other people.
Yeah, no. It's not for me. Good luck to him. That sounds so mean. I don't mean that. Sorry, Este.
It'll be interesting to see how the perception of him does or doesn't change next year with Pierre, because right now Esteban comes off as the like to some degree one. The more likable, stable, normal, for lack of a better word.
You know you're in trouble when the one driver that makes you look likable is Fernando Alonso. Also, okay, briefly, can I just say, like, obviously Carlos Sainz loves Fernando Alonso because Spain, but like, I'm obsessed with that little friendship, the love between them, because they just seem like vastly different characters. But like, yeah, Carlos just loves him and Fernando really likes Carlos. And you're just like, you guys are opposites. And I love that. I love the friendship. Love the love.
Such polar opposites.
Okay, wait. So keep telling me the Este.
Oh,
that's the whole story.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Okay. There was one last thing I was thinking of. I have no idea what. Oh, Mick. I know what. What is Haas going to do? What is Haas going to do? Because I love Nico Hülkenberg. No. Even Nico Hülkenberg is out here like, I'm not in great shape anymore. And
did he say that?
No, but he did an interview on a podcast where she was asking like if his training regimen has changed as he's gotten older, and he was basically like, I'm a reserve driver now. I'm just not in as good of shape. That's fair.
Which, to be fair, I was listening to the Beyond the Grid with with Nick DeVries. Very sweet, really good interview where he was like, I felt like he went more in depth and was much more honest than you might hear from some of the drivers. Very much on the like Carlos Sainz analytical level. But one of the things he was talking about is that like because he's not driving on a consistent basis, he's not in this right shape to be driving Formula One. So not only on Nico Hulkenberg.
No, and I'm not saying that, but you know, I think the other side of it, like, and again, I think Nico's just lovely, but I also think like why I think Haas makes some strange choices when it comes to driver choice because they tend to make quite a good car and then they really struggle. I don't know if it's because they're paying their drivers so little or what is happening, but I'm like, there have to be other options out there, babe.
Yeah, I don't know. And like, I mean, we weren't really following the sport when Roman and Kevin were driving for them for like 4 years in a row with the same drivers. But it seems a little crazy that with the amount of crashes that Roman had and like that they kept them, both of them, for so long.
Yes. And even Kevin Magnussen, like he can be really good, one in like every 4 or 5 races, but that doesn't even get you where you need to be in the constructors.
Yes. And it also, though, at least the way it was portrayed in Drive to Survive, when they made the drastic switch and fired both of them and got Mick and Nikita Mazepin, the way it was framed felt like they need to do this for financial reasons.
Money. Yes.
Because Mick was the like financial savior of getting German sponsorships. And then Nikita, which they didn't talk about as much until he came in, like his dad was the funding for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot there where you're like, okay, well, either because also like with Roman and Kevin, they took them on after they had been drivers at other better teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of like, you definitely paid for these guys. And they weren't doing well enough that their other teams really wanted them. And then you kept them as they continued to be medium, which is fine. But like, why are they not? It just, I don't understand why they're not cultivating their rookies like the same way that like obviously AlphaTauri or Alfa Romeo. Oh, I'm losing it. It's not Alfa Romeo anymore, is it?
No, it is.
Is it? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. That really threw me that they both are Alpha. Alfa Romeo, like, and Alfa Romeo seems so obvious about it, where they're like, this is always our one rookie. This is always our one old guy who's like outgoing, who's training him up, making him great.
And we're going to give them a couple of years to find their footing and see what they've got.
Yeah. And they are not always successful, like poor Antonio Giovinazzi, but like they have a strategy. And I look at Haas and I'm like, I don't understand the strategy.
And even with like how ruthless Red Bull can be, like Yuki, I love Yuki, but he has not been like amazing in the past 2 years. He struggled a lot his first year. He's gotten significantly better. Still not amazing. And like Red Bull and AlphaTauri are still continuing to give him that seat and give him time to develop, whereas Haas are telling Mick Schumacher that unless you score points, we're not giving you a seat for next year. And you're like, you're in a position where your car can't even necessarily get into the points on a consistent basis, and there are so few races left. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's like I think there's a lot to be said for if the strategy is Mick, then develop Mick.
Yeah.
Because it's not Nico. It's not Nico. I don't think it's Nico.
And I think it could be Mick if he's given the right development. And I think Kevin Magnussen could potentially be the right person to do that. But
potentially.
But I don't know if putting Mick in this pressure cooker of you're going to lose your seat unless you like perform amazingly is going to help anything.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's like,
yeah, I don't know.
It doesn't work that way. It does feel like This is my last, I don't know, I'm in a midwifery mindset tonight. This is my last midwifery like tidbit for F1, but there's something about birth that's very like, sometimes you try to force something and it almost never works. And because birth is such a just like, you know, like if it's not working, don't push it, find the alternative solution. And I feel like I'm watching like Daniel Ricciardo try and just like push it. And you're like, it's not working. You need to flow into something else. And same with Haas, where you're like, it's not working, babe.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're ending this on a depressing note. So let's talk about something happy to end the pod.
It was fun to actually have a real battle for who was going to win the race.
Yeah. Oh, poor
that
Hamilton.
Was fun. I know.
That would have been nice for him.
It would have been fun to see him win and cool to see him get to keep his streak of winning a race in every single year alive. Which, unless something like crazy happens in the next 3 races, it's hard to imagine him winning one of them. But I mean, it is Formula One, so you never know.
Oh, favorite, I think, nutty theory is that Russell took out Carlos so that Hamilton could do that well. I'm like, this is not Crashgate, kids. Like, it's not it. Have you read about that, Fernando?
I have not. I've heard of it, but I don't actually know that much about what happened.
Go read up on it.
Give me the highlights.
I can't remember where Fernando was when this was happening. I think Renault, but essentially there were like team orders for his teammate to like crash into someone so that he could win a race. And at the time he was like, no, everyone was like, no, that's not at all. It was an accidental crash. And then like a decade later, the teammate was like, no, it was planned.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
F1, baby.
Oh my god.
Yeah, go read up on it because I've given you a very light overview on that, but that's my understanding of I want to say it was at Suzuka or something. Maybe that's totally wrong, but
can you imagine
maybe it was in Japan, but it wasn't at Suzuka.
Okay.
I don't know.
Can you imagine if last year Checo had crashed into Hamilton during Abu Dhabi?
Yeah.
It would have gone crazy, even more so than it did.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think what makes F1 what it is that it's deeply corrupt, and that's why it's so fun, because it's rough to watch governments be corrupt. It's more okay to watch sports be corrupt.
There's at least less personal significance attached to it.
Yeah, I guess. No.
I did. I was listening to a podcast. I don't remember who it was with or who was talking about, or who was talking about it, but they were talking about back in like 2007, 2008, McLaren, who was Alonso and Hamilton driving for at the time, had been caught cheating by basically getting blueprints to their competitor's car and copying from their blueprints. And McLaren lost all of their constructors' points for 2007 and 2008. But the drivers got to keep their drivers' championship points. And it's like, I cannot imagine what it must have been like to be following Formula One at the time, and just like the drama, insane.
I do have to say, there's something, well, I don't think we've talked about this, but to briefly say, like Red Bull has been found to have breached the cost gap. And the FIA has basically been like, it was a whoopsie, guys.
Has the FIA actually said that though?
They basically implied they're not going to punish them severely.
I thought what I had heard is that the FIA had put forth a possible punishment option to Red Bull, and it's unclear if Red Bull has taken it yet.
Okay. You're definitely you're a facts girl. I'm a feelings girl. So you're definitely more right than I am. But I do love like all the memes of like Toto reinterpreting the cost cap.
Yes.
And it's like a plane.
Yes.
And I do wonder about like the teams bringing their upgrades. You're like, these look a lot better. Like these cars are working better now. What's happening, guys? Are we all reinterpreting the cost cap?
Who knows?
And then I'm like, maybe I like it better this way because I would rather see a bunch more competitive cars. Because you do start to sit there and think like the Red Bull is too competitive.
And I mean, if the FIA is going to let Red Bull get away with a meaningless fine or something, why wouldn't all the other teams start doing the exact same thing as them?
Yeah.
Which then calls into question, like, why is there a cost gap if it's not going to actually do what we need it to do?
Yeah, because also like there are so many teams who are not even close to meeting it and can't pay the fine and wouldn't even think of it.
Yeah.
So then you're like, okay, so we're back where we started. And I think that it's interesting because like all of the drivers are out here being like, except it's all, you know, like it's like that joke with they're asking all the drivers like what they would want. And Fernando says he wants to race in like equal cars or something. And then Lewis Hamilton is like, I don't want that. And it's like, of course, the team that's pulling away doesn't want that. And I don't want to watch, you know, I don't want to watch all the people in the same cars. But, you know, the drivers, I think, except if you're in that top group, the drivers are all out here being like, I wish the races were closer. I wish we were, I wish there was more in the middle. And to end my thoughts on this whole race, like Jamie and I are watching and we're like, dang, you know, it's so fun to watch the midfield because it's so tight and there's so much movement and they so rarely show it on the broadcast.
I know. It's hard to even fully follow what's going on with the midfield because
they're like there was a crash, nobody knows what happened, and you're like, can you show it to me?
But I mean, they're just showing like Max chasing down Charles and then Lewis, which like, yes, it's very exciting, and yes, it's for the lead of the race, and yes, it's also going to determine whether or not Red Bull clinches the like constructors championship this weekend. But I agree, it would be so much fun to see more of the midfield, which maybe Drive to Survive this year will be better and cover more of the midfield because the title battle is really not that interesting.
Yeah. And I do think like I was really disappointed in Drive to Survive last year because I felt like they did not cover the midfield well enough. And like,
yeah,
there's a lot to be said for like, even watching a race, it's like, yeah, I want to know who's going to win. But the reality is, and I think Valtteri Bottas has talked about this, like there's not a lot of movement at the top. Right. It is.
Yeah.
It's like once every 5 laps that they're like making the go for it and passing each other. Whereas the midfield is just like a free for all. And like, that is interesting. Fernando Alonso is launching his car into the air. And you're like, that's the race.
Yeah. I have high hopes that the season of Drive to Survive is going to be better simply because there is so much good drama going on everywhere that's not just like Max and Lewis fighting each other at the top. And like Max does not have very many interesting storylines this year besides he got in a car, he drove it perfectly, not perfectly, but he drove it better than anyone else. And he won a lot. Moving on. Let's get to the other good storylines.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. I'm in.
Agreed. Hopefully. Yeah. I hope.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited to see Mexico City. I think it's going to be rad. Sarah, this is Anne's honorary home race.
I don't think I can claim that.
No, that's a joke. That's a joke in bad taste. But I think it's going to be a rad race. I'm really excited to see it.
It's going to be fun.
I love the Checo support just in Austin.
I know, it's so good. Even like, I don't know if you caught it, but when they were like, the top 3 were going up to the podium and Red Bull pulled out this like crazy giant car with sofas with a bunch of their mechanics and other people, and Checo was on there. The crowd saw him and started chanting for Checo instead of any of the people who were going to go up on the podium.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
sweet.
it's so fun to watch those like hometown moments.
Yeah. He's going to do a show run in Guadalajara tomorrow.
Wow.
I am excited to see footage of that because he did one in Mexico City last year, but Guadalajara is like where he's from and where he lives.
Oh.
And it's going to be even, I think it's going to be even wilder and just super sweet. So.
Well, it sounds rad. I'm super excited.
Christian Horner has said that their goal is to make sure Checo gets P2 in the Drivers' Championship and that he wins Mexico.
I honestly hope he wins Mexico too.
It'd
If it
so
can't be
fun.
Carlos Sainz, I hope that it's Checo.
The people would go insane.
Yeah.
So crazy. Yeah. And his dad would be just like full out weeping.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's gonna be good.
It's gonna be rad.
So good.
I'm excited. So meet back in a week.
Yeah.
Recap it up.
Absolutely.
I'll bring you some more fan fiction updates.
Sounds perfect. And hopefully we're both feeling better.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see. Well, thank you all for joining us on We Don't Know Wheel F1.
Signing off. I'm Grace.
I'm Anne, and we'll see you in Mexico.